The Outlaw is back in a Denver Broncos uniform in the wild, wild AFC West. Was this the move that the Broncos were looking to make all along at inside linebacker? Plus, what does the Broncos starting defense look like as of today going into next season? And what about George Paton? What does he still plan to do for the Broncos defense? You get that and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked On NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. Both of us, we cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked On Network and 9 News. Broncos country, thank you so much for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day with your morning cup of coffee here today. Free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format. Also here on YouTube. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. On a quest to get to 10K subscribers here on YouTube, we'll be doing a free Russell Wilson jersey giveaway once we hit 10K. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button, share this podcast with a Broncos fan that you know help us get there. We appreciate you so much, Broncos country, for taking time to listen to us here. Sayre, hey, look, man, it's been a busy week so far for us here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. Free agency has been crazy. The Broncos making some moves. The big move yesterday, Randy Gregory, the next pass rusher here for the Broncos defense. But then later on in the afternoon on Tuesday, we saw the Broncos bring back one of their key guys, the Outlaw, Josey Jewell.
And I remember, Cody, just like it was yesterday, the Broncos using a 4th-round pick on Josey Jewell. I was, of course, very excited. As you know, I get very excited anytime an Iowa player is drafted by the Denver Broncos. But, man, Josey Jewell, that one just hit a little bit different. He was a 4-year player at Iowa, 4-year starter, just tremendously productive, tremendously durable. And obviously, he's an Iowa football legend at this point, in my eyes at least. I don't know if everyone would agree with that, but I think the Outlaw is a legend in black and gold just as much as, now maybe he's got a second chance now, a 2-year deal to really etch his place in Denver Broncos history as well. I know he hasn't obviously done anything historic up to this point, but man, before the pectoral injury, it just felt like he was ascending into that spot where, like, man, he was finally becoming the player that I and many others thought he could be coming out of Iowa. Now he gets a 2-year deal. I thought maybe a 1-year deal, Cody, for Josey Jewell. I like that the Broncos are getting him a 2-year deal, give him some stability beyond this season and say, like, hey, look, go be the leader of this defense. Go be the captain, the quarterback in the middle. I love the move.
Interesting enough that you say that. Obviously, our good friend Mike Kliss, 9 News reporter here, he had said that a Broncos executive called Josey Jewell the glue guy for the Broncos defense. So it's safe to assume that he will probably be the Broncos starting linebacker at the Mike position in 2022. I know we'll talk about what the defense looks like a little bit more, but the Broncos weren't the only team that were interested in Josey Jewell. It was reported that there were up to 5 different teams around the NFL that had interest in the Broncos veteran player. Interesting enough, maybe how this impacts the free agency market, but for Josey Jewell, obviously for him, he wanted to stay. Let's talk about the contract and the bargain deal that he got here by George Paton.
Yeah, 2 years, $11 million. That's about the bottom of the barrel in terms of veteran starters. And when you look at all the different numbers across the league, you look at some of these contracts that are being given out. I believe Fred Warner is at $19 million per year, Cody. So obviously Josey Jewell is not Fred Warner and hasn't had that kind of impact on games as Fred Warner has. So we get the discrepancy there, but at the same time, you're talking about the difference between $19 million and $5.5 million per season. $5.5 million is just above like what first-round rookies have on their average annual salary right now. So, Josey, that's a pretty great team-friendly deal, and the fact that there were other suitors as well leads me to believe that the Broncos were just like, hey, we'll match, we'll be competitive, we'll give you, we'll match what maybe your best offer is or something like that, or we'll come really close to that. And obviously you're going to have a chance to now win with us. That was something that they could not necessarily promise before, but it makes you wonder too, like who were those teams that were pursuing? I don't know if any were named, but obviously you think about Ed Donatel now with the Minnesota Vikings and appealing to Josey's Midwestern roots, so that could have been a potential option there. We don't know that, but they did sign Jordan Hicks right after the Josey Jewell deal came about to almost an identical contract. So it makes you wonder, maybe Ed Donatel was doing some recruiting and the Broncos just found a way to get him back.
Hey, familiarity is super important, especially when it comes to defense. I wouldn't have been surprised if the Vikings were one of those teams, and obviously we'll find out probably the reports. But man, hey, also, Sarah, today's the day everything becomes official at 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. The new NFL league year rolls around, which means that the Russell Wilson trade, the agreeing to terms with Randy Gregory, DJ Jones, they all become official. Now, Josey Jewell is official because of the fact he was an in-house guy. He didn't have to wait. So everything is officially official. And will the Broncos make more moves here today on day 3 of NFL free agency, particularly on the defensive side of the ball? What does the Broncos defense look like? What does the linebacker room look like? Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that right now, coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about Built Bar, the sponsor of today's episode, Locked On Broncos. And as you all know it, Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar that is out there on the market today. The bars are covered in 100% milk chocolate, and when you take a bite into them, they are soft and they are easy to chew. And you can get your hands on a box of Built Bar today by going to Built.com. They have 9 amazing, delicious flavors, including the occasional limited time flavors. They have different flavors every month, or 2 to 3 different flavors that you can try exclusively at Built.com, including the churro puffs, which, Sarah, that is in my rotation. I'm almost out of the box that I ordered. I can't wait to get more Built Bar by going to Built.com here today. And look, if you need a little bit extra fuel to get yourself through the day, they contain 17 grams of protein, 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. For something that contains 100% milk chocolate, that is a bargain, like Josey Jewell's new contract here with the Denver Broncos. Outside of that, you can go to Built.com here today, folks, and go there. And when you go to checkout and you find a box, you find a flavor that suits you and your family's needs best, make sure you use promo code LOCK15, and that's going to get you 15% off your next order at Built.com. As we jump into the second half action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, once again, a major shout out here to Broncos Country. Thank you so much for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Both Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we always appreciate the interaction we get in the YouTube comment sections. We get it on Twitter. One thing we always ask, always keep the conversation with us. Always keep the conversation with other Broncos fans. Keep it respectful. That's what builds community here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. We appreciate it. And obviously the different opinions that do come in. We don't have to agree on everything, but we love you and we love your opinion as well. Broncos Country, thank you so much. But Sayre, diving a little bit deeper now into this Broncos linebacker room, very interesting. I know one of the things we floated out on yesterday's episode of the show, one of our shows that we did before the breaking news podcast with Randy Gregory coming over, we talked about maybe the rumor mill suggesting Bobby Wagner there. Look, at this point in time, too, here's a possibility for Denver. Once the new league year rolls around, I wouldn't be surprised if the Broncos got off to a quick start in terms of extending Russell Wilson, and then those back-end years really trying to create a little bit more cap space in the present moment now. I imagine some guys will be asked to restructure. I've gotten a lot of questions. What does the Broncos cap space look like now with all these moves? I have no idea because the new league year is not officially here. These deals are not yet official, so we can't really account for that until we get that finalization. And obviously the sites will update Spot Track over the cap. We'll have you covered there and what the Broncos can do. But as we're seeing too, I know even if the Broncos had like $23 million in salary cap space, Sayre, they can still make a lot of moves contingent upon the fact if those deals for whatever they sign are very team-friendly cap-wise in the first couple of years, they can really spread that out through the course of a couple of seasons. But let's take a look at the Broncos' projected starting linebackers here. With Josey Jewell's return, you have him as the Mike linebacker here, and then it's projected that Baron Browning will be the starting will linebacker. Your thoughts on this initially, especially considering the Broncos defense right now as it's shaping up to be.
Well, I love this option, and I'm bummed we didn't get to see it in 2021, right? I mean, we got to see Baron Browning with Kenny Young, which was exciting because both of those guys really fly around, very athletic. Josey Jewell obviously is not like one of those high relative athletic score type of players. He wasn't a bad athlete coming out of Iowa by any means, but he wasn't. He wasn't in the green. I don't think. I'm sure he's probably on the scale of green to yellow to red. I'm sure he was at the high yellow or something like that for people who are into the relative athletic scores like Cody and I are. But man, I feel like this is a very exciting duo potentially because you have one who's like a super ultra talented athlete in Baron Browning, who's got incredible range, and I think I don't know if you would agree with me on this, Cody. To me, he showed better instincts with his play than I thought coming from Ohio State, where he was kind of playing all over the defensive formation, off the edge, off-ball linebacker, doing a lot of different stuff. He showed some really good instincts at the off-ball linebacker position as a rookie that I think was a little unexpected. And for Josey Jewell, his game is almost entirely instincts. I mean, he plays fast. He may not time out fast as a track athlete, but he does play fast and he plays hard. He hits hard. Just ask King Derrick Henry how hard Josey Jewell hits, right? I mean, He is a hard-hitting linebacker, and he's shown better in coverage than I think people thought that he would coming out of Iowa. I'm really excited about this duo, especially with Josey Jewell making the calls defensively, and he improves the Broncos' run defense, which was a big problem in 2021 as well.
Well, and one of the questions too, Tim, one of the listeners here, Lockdown Broncos on YouTube, had put a question on our breaking news podcast about, Josey Jewell and Baron Browning, and brought up the coverage dynamic. And like I think you nailed it perfectly here. Josey Jewell doesn't have to be the guy that runs a 4-4 that can cover a running back out of the backfield. What we have seen from him, you can make up for some of those deficiencies when we talk about speed when you're very smart. And Josey Jewell arguably he and Justin Simmons have the highest IQ in terms of football and defensive stature on the Broncos defense. And when we've seen him play very instinctual as well. So it's not necessarily that you need these guys to cover, because Sayre, obviously it's been floated out there that the Broncos, they're going to be rumored to be playing a lot of nickel and dime this upcoming season, which means that they're going to have various cover guys, the safeties, the nickels, the dime slot corners, and also the outside guys as well. I know the Broncos still have to add some depth there, but really, you look at the base defense that the Broncos have here, it's very appealing. Base right now, Randy Gregory, Draymond Jones, Mike Purcell, DJ Jones, and then on the other side of it, you have Bradley Chubb, and at linebacker, you have Josey Jewell, and you also have Baron Browning right now. Those guys are going to be predicated on stopping the run out of the base 3-4. So ideally, I don't think in passing situations, these guys are always going to be on the field. I think that in passing situations, you're going to see the mix of the nickel and the dime. But in base rundowns, I think we will see them in this thing. And I think that's really what the Broncos are asking them to do. They're going to generate pressure. And as we heard Ejiro Evero say, Sayre, the Broncos, if they can't get home with 4, they're going to get home with 5. They can't get home with 5, they're going to send 6. And that means that we're going to see Josey Jewell blitzed a lot more. And look, you can even move Baron Browning to edge in certain situations if you want to. So the prospects are out there for this Broncos defense. It's shaping up really nicely. But I also have another question for you. Should the Broncos be done adding guys at this point to the defensive side of the ball?
I don't think so. I really think that they have some more spots that they need to address. Absolutely. Should they be done adding guys at the inside linebacker position? I think that's another question completely. I think a lot of Broncos fans would still say, get Bobby Wagner at all costs, right? Go out there and make that big splash move. And yes, that would be a lot of fun. No, there's not necessarily a requirement to play Baron Browning or Jonas Griffith this year. And obviously health is a concern for everyone on board. Like that was a big issue at the position last year. So yes, you would maybe consider that. But at the same time, you bring Josey Jewell back into the fold. I think that kind of shows maybe that the Broncos are kind of at a spot where if Bobby Wagner wants to come to Denver on their terms, they would maybe consider it. At the same time, Josey Jewell, you pencil him in as a starter. And then what do we know that George Paton likes to do? Or that he's really going to live by this? He wants to draft, he wants to develop, and he wants to get guys on second contracts that they bring in, that they develop, that they bring these guys in and they see their development through. I think that's the philosophy that really every GM should have, and a lot of other general managers don't necessarily share that in terms of like their first round picks or second round picks. We see a lot of teams just start to give up on those in recent years, like the Los Angeles Rams, who just won a Super Bowl, no first round pick since 2016. But man, for George Paton, I feel like that's so important to him. And so you've got to keep that in mind when we're considering what the Broncos are doing in free agency here, because I think that speaks highly to what they think of Baron Browning and the fact that they like Jonas Griffith a lot, and they want to get those guys on the field and get them to second contracts, just like George Paton's vision from when he first joined the team.
Well, Micah Kaiser's still a restricted free agent, so it'd be very easy for the Broncos to bring him back if they wanted to. And then you also have Justin Sternot still on the roster, obviously out of Wake Forest, who, I think this is going to be a big year for him in terms of training camp. He's going to have a lot to prove, because there were some moments last year. Look, and I've been a big supporter, big fan of Justin Sternot here for the Broncos. I think he has still all the potential in the world to grow and to continue to develop into something special. However, I think he's going to really have to prove it in this year's training camp, because as you mentioned, if the Broncos bring back Jonas Griffith, well, I mean, they already have, but if they bring back a Micah Kaiser, and then maybe they added somebody else in this year's NFL draft, there's going to be competition at that linebacker spot there, because you want guys that can play both defense and also special teams for you as well. Sternot can be that special teams guy. He can cover rollout for himself, but he's also going to have to prove that he can be a reliable linebacker guy. If something were to go down and he needed to get thrown into the action, that he can be relied upon. And obviously that's going to be a very contingent factor for the Broncos here this offseason. But I did love what you brought up too about what George Paton said. When he came in as GM, the first thing he said was, we want to draft and we want to develop players. Now the Broncos draft class from 2021 has been very special. With 2022, we'll see what it looks like, especially considering the fact the Broncos don't pick until late round 2 with that additional pick that they got from the LA Rams. But outside of that, man, I am so excited to see what happens here. George Paton making some calculated moves here for the Broncos. And of course, obviously, I think we've seen the one risky move so far with Randy Gregory. But that's also like you want to see your GM also take calculated risks as well. And it has all the opportunity to pay off for this Denver Broncos team. Josey Jewell back on a very team-friendly deal here going into 2022. But now we talk about the remaining needs for the Denver Broncos on the defensive side of the ball. What are they going to do at safety, cornerback, nickel? Sayre, Bedinger, myself, we're going to address that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me just tell you, if you're a Colorado sports fan, the Locked On Podcast Network has everything that you could be looking for the teams that you root for on Sundays, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, or Fridays, depending on the sport. We have the Locked On Broncos podcast, which you get 5 days of coverage here all year long, all things orange and blue. Then you get the Locked On Nuggets podcast hosted by Adam Mares and Matt Moore. They have you covered. Then you have the Locked On Rockies podcast. As they're coming out of the MLB lockout, they have you covered as well. Paul Holden has you covered with all the things you need to know about the Colorado Rockies. And our good friend Chris Maselli has you covered with the Locked On Avalanche podcast. You get that exclusively here on the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, Sayre, as we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today will be the official day the new league year starts at 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. For all of us living in Colorado, that is 2 o'clock p.m. Mountain time. So we are all eyeing that time frame for things to become official, but that doesn't mean that the Denver Broncos will be done. We've seen some teams like the Jacksonville Jaguars come out and spend a lot of money, and look, it's very questionable, some of the moves that they've made and the amount of money that they've given up. I know Broncos fans have been freaking out a little bit about, hey, how come George Paton's not making these big-time splashes for the organization? You see a lot of these teams come out day one, day two of the legal tampering periods there, overspend. And I think it definitely impacts things. What did we see George Paton do last year, though, coming in as the general manager? We were all wondering about safety, right? Last year at this very point. What are the Broncos going to do there? I think that George Paton's eyeing the safety market right now. And look, one of those notable names, Kareem Jackson, who came back on a 1-year, $5 million deal and played really well for the Broncos last season. Could he potentially return? Let's start off at the safety position here, my friend. What are your thoughts on what the Broncos can or should do at this point?
Well, bringing back Kareem Jackson is certainly one of the things they can do, right? I mean, and I think he's well liked in the locker room at this point. He's done well with Justin Simmons, like you mentioned. He fulfilled his first 3 years with the Broncos. I know it didn't maybe necessarily go exactly as planned. They let him go last year and then found a way to bring him back at a reduced price. And so I think the Broncos got a good value from Kareem Jackson last year, to be honest with you. And it does make you wonder. I mean, with the injuries that he went through last season, at his age, which I relate. I mean, I'm getting there, Kareem. I'm getting there with you. So at his age, do you re-sign him again for this year? And do you kind of keep everybody in the same roles that they had last year? Or do you go after a younger player on the free agent market? And we're seeing a lot of these names, they're flying off the board, and it's such a mixed bag. You got people like Marcus Williams signing with the Baltimore Ravens for $14 million a year. And then you've got guys like, Jordan Whitehead, a really good player from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, signing for like half that. So I don't know where the safety market is at, Cody. I have absolutely no idea what to expect. I mean, you get $10 million per year for Justin Reed going to the Kansas City Chiefs. Would you make a big splash at safety right now? I mean, I don't know that I would necessarily go big. There's guys out there like Tyrann Mathieu is out there still a free agent, and
He
I don't know
might be
what
pissed at the Chiefs too, by the way, though, Sayre. They did him wrong, in my opinion. I'm not very
I
happy. I
think
feel bad for
so.
Tyrann Mathieu. They went and got Justin Reed, and they could have gave him the same exact contract. Tyrann
Yeah.
Mathieu, hey, I wouldn't be opposed. Tyrann Mathieu, we'd welcome you in Denver.
Wouldn't that be fun too to see?
Oh,
And I
man.
I keep trying to kind of look back to see like the last time he was a free agent, did he mess around with the Seattle Seahawks? Because at that point, all those guys were trying to play with Russell Wilson, right? It's not like, oh, I want to go. I can't wait to go be part of the Seattle Seahawks. Let's be real. It's all about Russell Wilson and getting to play with an elite quarterback like that. That's why Tyrann Mathieu ultimately signed with the Kansas City Chiefs, isn't it? Because of Patrick Mahomes, not because the Kansas City Chiefs are this powerhouse of an NFL franchise historically. You want to go play with a great quarterback. And I'm not trying to speak poorly of the Chiefs. I'm not trying to trash talk. It's a great organization historically, but I mean, that's what players are looking for in free agency, like Tyrann Mathieu, and goal accomplished. So to me, I would say go for it, man. I mean, go get him. If you're talking, like you talked about in a previous segment, Cody, if the Broncos are trying to extend Russell Wilson and push those cap hits down the road and free up that cap space, you're a contending team now. You got to make contending team moves. And so that's where I would advocate strongly for a move like Tyrann Mathieu. This isn't the Denver Broncos of 2020 where we're rolling with Drew Lock and we're kind of just like, all right, let's just kind of see what happens. This is a contending team. You have to make contender moves. And I trust George Paton to go out and do that. And I'd say Tyrann Mathieu, that's a contending move.
Well, let's take a look now at the nickel corner position. Bryce Callahan, obviously the Broncos and he have been in talks, and Bryce has opened to coming back to Denver as well. Will he come back? I know you put a tweet out there that you said, you know what, I don't know if I'd welcome that back considering some of the injury history stuff that we've seen from Callahan. What would you do at nickel here in this situation, Sayre? I'm eager for your thoughts.
Yeah, I put that tweet out there, and I think, as expected, mixed results from everyone. I don't even know if you and I are on the same page as this one, Cody. I think you would definitely like to have Callahan back, and I think that's totally fine. Like, if he comes back to the Broncos, I'm not going to be sitting here like degrading the whole offseason because of it. At the same time, guys who are above 30 with a variety of injury concerns, to me, that's just not the best use of your free agency money. And even if you could get Bryce Callahan on a team-friendly deal, let's just say they could get him for, $4 or $5 million on 1 year contract, you're still planning on him being your number one nickel. So that adjusts your entire rest of your plan. That has a domino effect on who else you bring in. So I would probably go after somebody who's A, younger, and B, has less of a substantial injury history. There's a few guys out there. I know Isaiah Oliver was thrown out there by Benjamin Albright, and he's a former Colorado player, and I think we've talked about him before. A couple former Vikings draft picks are out there, so if there's a George Paton connection to be found, I just think you got to go with somebody younger and with fewer injuries on their resume at this point.
Well, and two, Jeff Gladney's also a name that Albright said to keep an eye on as well. Obviously, for him, he just went through the criminal court process and was found not guilty of, what happened, I think, in Dallas in terms that led to him being released as the first round pick of the Minnesota Vikings. You don't see that happen too often unless there's something severe. But obviously, the Vikings, they stood ground there, and now he went through the whole legal process. He's cleared it. So will the Broncos welcome something like that? But also in the nickel, too, you can move down a guy like Caden Stearns, who's playing that hybrid safety role as well. He played the dime backer, but he also covered the nickel. And the Broncos are bringing back PJ Locke here as well here, Sayre. I don't know if that's been talked about, but Locke will return for the Broncos here in 2022. So they have a lot of different versatility options in terms of mixing and matching guys. Specifically, they want to go nickel or dime. So there is that, but then also I think maybe trust in the draft at either position, or, do you want to go out in free agency and spend? One of the natures of this business too is like, we may not see it this week. Like, Sayre, the Broncos could make moves at these positions 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, as we've seen George Paton do historically so far. It's not about spending the most money right away. It's about spending the right money. So, like I said, I'm eager to see what George Paton is going to do with the Denver Broncos. Will there be any moves that happen here today on day 3 of the NFL legal tampering period at the start of the NFL new league year, officially 4 p.m. Eastern time here? We appreciate you tuning in today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, for all your Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. You get us here on your favorite audio podcasting platform. You can watch us here on YouTube. Like I said, once we get to 10K subscribers, we're doing a free jersey giveaway, and we'll give away 1 free Russell Wilson jersey to 1 lucky man or woman that watched this podcast, and you get a jersey of your choice there of Russ, and we'll send it to you courtesy of Sayre and myself here on the Lockdown Broncos podcast. But with that said, that will wrap up today's episode show. If there's any kind of breaking news that happens today, stay on standby, because Sayre, Bedinger, myself, we have you covered with breaking news podcasts, emergency podcasts here on the Lockdown Broncos podcast.